The exhibition's called Daphne, and it's made up of an animation and lots of installation works, which are sculptures that are all around the space. The title Daphne comes from the Greek myth Daphne and Apollo, and I started the exhibition with the idea that I wanted to retell a Greek myth, and this came from a book I was given from my grandma, which had been passed down to my mum and then passed down to me. And it was called The First Stories, and within that book it had retellings of Greek myths, and at the end of each myth it would tell you where that myth had been repeated in popular culture, whether that was in Shakespeare or in a painting. And I thought it was really interesting how those stories had permeated popular culture still to this day in different forms. So I wanted to start with the story of Daphne because it's got quite an interesting structure. It's in 3 parts, and the first part, Daphne's on her own. The second part, she meets Apollo and there's a kind of chase scene, and then it leads into the final part where she transforms into a tree, and that transformation happens as a way of realising that she has to lose her body in order to have true freedom in a way. And I was really interested in the way that that particular story has lots of echoes in popular culture and in a wider, more structural way in terms of power relations. In particular, I was looking at the idea of the chase scene and how that's something that's goes through, movies even today have this like constant chase scene motif. And I'm particularly interested in that, especially in relation to animation works, and a lot of the chase scene within the animation in the show relates to Looney Tunes and the kind of Roadrunner motif of running around a stationary object like a boulder and having that on a loop. So I'm really interested in the way that the kind of old stories and myths can thread through a culture in ways that are sometimes really recognisable and sometimes much more subtle on a kind of structural level. There's some interesting parallels in the exhibition between the use of animation and the use of Greek myths. And for example, I really wanted to use Greek myths as they're these early stories that have run through popular culture in different forms, sometimes in really obvious ways and sometimes in more abstract, structural ways. And animation has a kind of interesting parallel to that as they use style sheets within different studios to actually decide how a particular character looks. So for example, for a TV show, Warner Brothers or Disney might have a particular set of rules for characters and how they should look to make sure that there's like a consistency of identity. And they, even for kind of animals or for differences between male and female characters, those rules can be as simple as adding eyelashes to a mouse to make it a female character. And I've taken a lot of those kind of grammars around identity and fed them through the aesthetics of how a lot of the sculptures within the exhibition look, and also some of the ways that the actual animation is drawn is taken from those style sheets. The animation of Daphne is about nearly 3 minutes long, and it's made up of about 2,000 individual drawings, and they are all done with black ink on white paper, and those drawings have all been digitised and played in order at about 10 frames per second. That's quite slow for playing an animation, and so I kind of wanted it to be at the frame rate where you would just at the point where you're recognising it as a moving image rather than it being just a series of still images. And it kind of ties together with a lot of the idea of ambiguity in the film, about ambiguity of touch, whether something's kind of touch which is slightly sinister, and that kind of ambiguous nature of a lot of the motifs in the film. And it also ties into the actual idea of transformation, which is a major part of the final part of the film, where Daphne actually transforms into a tree. And the idea of transformation and metamorphosis comes into animation a lot in the way that your brain tricks you into seeing it as a moving image. When I started researching for the exhibition, I was looking a lot at how the story of Daphne and Apollo had come out in other forms of art. So I was looking at a lot of paintings through art history that had used that story. There's a lot of sculpture, a lot of music, a lot of classical music. And I came across a fabric pattern which was designed by Duncan Grant in the 1930s. And the fabric used these really beautiful muted colour palette of about 5 colours. And that's the colour palette which is throughout the whole exhibition. So all of the sculptures are using those colours. And I took the original fabric pattern and got the kind of colours mix that would really try and truly represent that slightly muted, like powdery tones that were in that original fabric pattern.